There's a scene, late in the story, where Itachi Uchiha is dying, sitting against a rock in the rain, and the last thing he does with his remaining strength isn't attack his brother. It's reach out and poke him gently on the forehead, the same gesture he used when Sasuke was a small child, right before collapsing for the final time. Fans call this the most beautiful moment in the entire series. I understand why. It's devastating, it's tender, it recontextualizes almost everything you thought you knew about the character in a single motion. But I want to ask a slightly different question than was this beautiful, because it obviously was. I want to ask, what did it actually cost this man to arrive at that moment, and is that cost something you should want for yourself? You know the shape of Itachi even if you've never watched a single episode of Naruto, because his story has become one of the most quoted tragic backstories in anime. Prodigy. Massacres his entire clan, including his own parents, at age 13, sparing only his younger brother. Spends the rest of his life as a hated missing nin, branded a traitor and a mass murderer by literally everyone, including the brother he spared, who grows up consumed by a singular need for revenge against him. And then, years later, we learn the truth. Itachi didn't do it out of ambition or madness. He did it under orders to prevent a civil war that would have destroyed the village and possibly killed Sasuke along with everyone else, and he chose to let his own name be destroyed rather than let his little brother carry the weight of what really happened, or grow up in a world torn apart by that war. He engineers his own death at his brother's hands as the final piece of the plan, ensuring Sasuke gets to become strong through hatred of him rather than have to live with a much more complicated grief. It's an extraordinary piece of storytelling. It's also, structurally, one of the most complete examples in fiction of someone erasing every part of themselves in service of a role they decided, unilaterally, that they had to play. And that's the part I want to sit with, because extraordinary sacrifice gets treated as an unambiguous virtue in most retellings of this story, when the actual text is a lot more troubling than that if you look closely at how Itachi handles literally every relationship in his life from that point forward. Let's start with the decision itself, because it's worth noticing what Itachi doesn't do before making it. He doesn't tell Sasuke the truth. He doesn't give his little brother the choice to know what's actually happening, to potentially help, to understand why any of this is occurring. He makes a unilateral decision that Sasuke's life will go better if Sasuke hates him forever, and then engineers an entire elaborate, years-long performance to make sure that hatred sticks. Think about what that actually requires as an ongoing practice. It's not one dramatic choice made in a moment of crisis. It's a sustained campaign of manipulation, executed with total precision, against the one person Itachi loves most in the world, for the explicit purpose of making that person suffer in a specific, controlled way that Itachi has decided is preferable to the alternative. This is where I think the story gets genuinely uncomfortable if you stop reading it purely as tragedy and start reading it as a character study. Itachi doesn't ask Sasuke what he wants. He doesn't trust his little brother with the truth, doesn't trust him to handle complexity, doesn't give him agency in his own life at all. Instead, Itachi decides, alone, what version of reality will serve Sasuke best, and then spends over a decade making sure Sasuke never has access to any other version. That's not really sacrifice in the way it gets marketed. It's control, dressed in the language of protection, executed by someone who has convinced himself that his judgment about what's best for another person's life is more valid than that person's own right to know the truth and choose for himself. And notice the cost this exacts on Itachi himself, because the show does actually track this, even if the fandom mostly skips past it in favor of the tragic hero framing. Itachi spends the entirety of his adult life as the most hated man in his own world. Every mission he goes on for the shadowy organization he's forced to join, every interaction he has with former friends and mentors, every glance from strangers who've heard the stories, all of it is built on a lie he's chosen never to correct, because correcting it would undermine the plan. He can never simply be known. Not by Sasuke, not by anyone else, not even really by the audience until the story is almost over and the truth finally gets revealed retroactively. His entire adult existence is a performance with an audience of zero, because the whole point is that nobody is supposed to see through it until after he's dead. That's the thing worth naming clearly. Itachi doesn't just sacrifice his reputation. He sacrifices the basic human experience of being understood by literally anyone while he's alive to experience it. Compare that to what a healthier version of protecting Sasuke might have looked like, telling him the truth when he was old enough to handle it, staying in his life as a flawed but present older brother, letting Sasuke be angry at the actual situation instead of at a fabricated villain, letting the relationship be complicated and difficult, and real instead of a carefully engineered lie. Itachi never considers this version, or if he does, the story doesn't show us him considering it. He goes straight to the most extreme possible interpretation of protection. Total self-erasure, total secrecy, total control over another person's emotional reality, maintained for years at the cost of ever being loved by the person he loves most, while he's alive to receive it. This pattern, deciding you know best. Refusing to let the people you love make informed choices about their own lives. Martyring yourself in a way specifically designed to be unappealable because you're not around to be argued with. Shows up constantly in real relationships, usually on a much smaller and less mythic scale, and it's almost never actually healthy, even when the intentions are good. Parents who make enormous sacrifices for their children without ever telling them, then feel quietly resentful or superior about it. Partners who make unilateral protective decisions about what the other person can handle knowing. Friends who disappear from your life rather than have a hard conversation, because disappearing feels cleaner than being honest about what's actually going on. Itachi is the most extreme, most mythologized version of this instinct, but the instinct itself is depressingly common, and the show, whether intentionally or not, gives you a 13-year study in exactly how much collateral damage that instinct can cause, even when the person doing it has genuinely good intentions, and even when, in the end, it sort of works. Because here's the thing, it does sort of work, narratively. Sasuke does get strong. The village does avoid a civil war in the immediate term. Itachi does achieve his stated goal, and I think this is actually part of why the character resonates so strongly and gets held up as an ideal. The plan succeeds, on its own terms, which makes it very easy to read the entire arc as validation of the method. But watch what success actually costs beyond the immediate goal. Sasuke, upon learning the truth, doesn't feel gratitude. He feels a completely new, arguably worse form of devastation, rage not at Itachi anymore, but at the entire village and world that let this happen, that let his brother suffer alone for years under a lie, that never gave him the chance to know his brother as anything other than a monster until it was too late to ever get that relationship back. Itachi's plan worked in the sense that Sasuke survived and got powerful. It failed catastrophically in the sense that it produced a deeply traumatized adult who spends a significant portion of the story trying to burn the entire world down out of grief and rage he never got the chance to process with the one person who could have helped him process it. His own brother, while his brother was still alive. So the actual lesson buried under all the tragic beauty of the character isn't sacrifice everything for the people you love. It's something closer to sacrifice made in total secrecy, without consent, without the humility to consider that the other person might deserve a say in their own life, tends to produce exactly the kind of pain it was supposed to prevent, just relocated and delayed. Itachi doesn't save Sasuke from suffering. He guarantees Sasuke will suffer differently, later, with the added burden of having spent years hating the one person who might have helped him carry it. Let's back up and look at the massacre itself more closely, because I think the details of how it's carried out reveal even more about the character's underlying pattern than the aftermath does. Itachi doesn't just kill his clan and leave. He does it with a level of precision and emotional control that's genuinely chilling once you sit with it. Assessing each family member, deciding who lives and who dies, executing an entire operation against people who trusted him, some of whom are children, all in a single night, while maintaining enough composure to also plant the specific psychological seeds he needs planted in Sasuke to ensure his brother's future development goes according to plan. That's not someone acting out of desperation in the heat of an impossible moment. That's someone executing a meticulously engineered outcome, treating human lives, including the lives of people who loved and trusted him, as variables to be managed in service of a larger design he alone gets to. Author. I want to be careful here, because the story does provide real justification for why he believed this was necessary. The clan was planning a coup that likely would have triggered a war, and Itachi was manipulated and pressured into the position by adults who should have found a better solution and didn't. He's not simply a villain, he's someone put in an impossible situation by people more powerful than him who failed at their jobs. That context is important, and the show is right to include it. But even granting all of that, even granting that he was doing his best inside constraints that were genuinely brutal, notice what he chooses to do with the impossible situation he's been handed. He doesn't try to find allies, doesn't try to warn anyone, doesn't try to solve the problem collaboratively even in secret with people he trusts. He decides alone that total unilateral action executed in total isolation is the only viable path, and then he builds every subsequent choice in his life around protecting that isolation, including from the person it's supposedly all being done for. This is actually the through line of his entire character. Once you notice it, Itachi never once considers partnership as a solution to any problem he faces. Not with the elders who could have been pushed harder for a peaceful solution, not with Shisui, his closest friend, whose death Itachi is complicit in covering up in ways that remain morally murky even by the end of the story. Not with the organization he's forced to join, where he maintains a double agent role for years, trusted by literally no one, confiding in literally no one, executing an extraordinarily dangerous long game entirely by himself, with no backup plan for what happens to his own psychological state if it takes as long as it does. Not with Sasuke, obviously, who gets the least honesty of anyone in his life despite being the person the entire plan supposedly exists to protect. Itachi's model of responsibility is total self-reliance escalated to a mythic degree, and the story treats this as heroic largely because it happens to work out, narratively, rather than because it was ever actually the wisest available option. Think about what it would have looked like if Itachi had trusted even one more person with a piece of the truth. If he'd told Kakashi, someone he genuinely seemed to respect, if he'd found a way to leave evidence for the future Hokage to discover earlier, rather than relying entirely on a deathbed conversation with Sasuke's eventual mentor to correct the record after Itachi himself is already gone. If he'd simply told Sasuke the truth once his brother was old enough, 16, 17, an age where plenty of shinobi are already carrying real responsibility, instead of orchestrating his own death specifically to avoid ever having that conversation. Every one of these alternatives involves a small act of trust that Itachi never extends to anyone, and I think that's the actual root of the tragedy, more than the massacre itself. The massacre was, arguably, forced on him by circumstance. The total isolation that follows it, sustained for over a decade, was a choice, repeated daily, to keep everyone, including the person he loves most, locked out of the truth of his own inner life. There's a way of reading Itachi that treats this isolation as noble, as the price of true selflessness, the idea being that a real hero doesn't need credit, doesn't need to be understood, is willing to be hated forever if it serves the greater good. And I understand the appeal of that framing, especially for people who feel like their own sacrifices go unnoticed or unappreciated. But notice what actually happens to a person who adopts that framework as a way of living. They stop being able to distinguish between genuine humility and a kind of martyrdom that quietly enjoys its own suffering, because the suffering has become proof of how much they care. Itachi doesn't just accept being hated as a necessary side effect. He engineers additional cruelty specifically to intensify Sasuke's hatred, provoking him during their final confrontation, making sure Sasuke's rage burns as hot as possible. Because Itachi has decided that hatred is the emotional fuel Sasuke needs to survive and grow strong. He's not just accepting pain. He's actively manufacturing more of it, calibrated precisely, in someone he loves, because he's convinced himself he knows better than Sasuke does what Sasuke actually needs to feel. That's worth sitting with for a second, because it reframes the entire beautiful sacrifice narrative into something closer to a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing your own judgment about someone else's emotional needs is more valid than simply asking them, or trusting them with information and letting them decide for themselves. Itachi's love for Sasuke is real. The show is unambiguous about that, and the final scene between them is genuinely earned emotionally. But real love expressed entirely through unilateral control, entirely through decisions made in someone else's name without their knowledge or consent, is still control. It just happens to be control aimed in a direction that, in this specific fictional case, produces a survivable outcome. Real life doesn't come with that guarantee, and neither, honestly, does the story itself. Sasuke's post-revelation arc involves him nearly destroying the entire world out of grief and rage at the system that let this happen, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement of the plan working as intended. I also want to talk about what this pattern costs Itachi specifically, apart from what it costs Sasuke, because I think his own interiority gets underexplored in most discussions of the character. We get almost no access to Itachi's internal experience for the vast majority of the story. He's presented, for most of Naruto's runtime, as an inscrutable, nearly silent figure, someone whose motivations are a total mystery, someone who barely speaks even when he's given screen time. That silence isn't incidental. It's the direct product of a man who has spent his entire adult life unable to say anything true to anyone, ever, about the thing that defines his entire existence. Imagine carrying the single most significant, most painful decision of your life, one that involved killing your own parents, completely alone, for over a decade, never once getting to process it out loud with someone who could offer perspective, comfort, or even basic acknowledgement of what that must have done to him internally. That's not strength. That's a person who has been isolated so completely by his own design that even his interiority becomes inaccessible to the narrative itself. We only get to understand Itachi retroactively through explanation after his death because he was never willing, while alive, to let anyone, audience included, actually know him. Contrast this, briefly, with how healing actually happens for other characters in the same story who've experienced real trauma. Naruto's growth is fundamentally social. He heals and grows through an enormous, expanding network of bonds, through people who refuse to let him isolate, through the explicit thematic argument the entire series makes that connection is what saves people. Itachi is essentially the thematic opposite of that argument made flesh, a supremely capable person who takes total isolation to its furthest possible extreme and calls it love. The story doesn't fully interrogate this contradiction. It's much more interested in making you cry over the forehead poke than in asking whether Itachi's method was actually the right one, but the contradiction is there if you're willing to look for it, sitting right next to one of the most celebrated character arcs in the entire medium. So if Itachi means something to you, and it's easy to see why he would, the loyalty, the willingness to be hated for, something you didn't actually do, the tenderness underneath all that composure, take the parts of him worth taking. The devotion to Sasuke was real. The tragedy of his circumstances was real, but don't take the method. Don't take the idea that real love means deciding unilaterally what someone else can handle knowing. Don't take the idea that being hated in silence is nobler than being honest and risking a harder, messier, more mutual relationship. Don't take the idea that carrying everything alone, for years, without ever letting a single person see the real weight of what you're holding, is what strength looks like. It isn't. It's what isolation looks like when it's been dressed up carefully enough that an entire fictional world, and a huge chunk of its audience, mistook it for love. The version of Itachi worth admiring isn't the master strategist who orchestrated his own death to avoid a difficult conversation. It's the brief, fragile moment at the very end where all the strategy finally falls away, and all that's left is an older brother reaching out one last time, honestly, with nothing left to protect, and nothing left to hide. That moment is real. It's also the only moment in the entire story where Itachi actually lets himself be seen. Everything else was a performance built to keep everyone, including the people who loved him most, at a distance he decided, alone, that they needed to be kept at. If there's a version of being like Itachi worth choosing, it's that final, unguarded gesture, not the decade of secrecy that made it necessary in the first place. There's one more angle worth exploring before wrapping this up, because I think it gets at something even more universally applicable than the specifics of ninja politics and clan massacres. The relationship between competence and isolation. Itachi is, by every measure the story gives us, extraordinarily capable, a prodigy who masters techniques other people spend lifetimes failing to learn, person who's supposedly fine. Itachi never gets a moment where someone says, "You don't have to do this alone." He never gets offered a version of the plan where he's allowed to have backup, allowed to be scared, allowed to need something back from the people he's protecting. The story doesn't really interrogate why that never happens, because it's too busy admiring how well he handles it, and I think that omission is itself instructive. We tend not to ask, "Are you okay?" of the people who look like they've got everything under control, and the people who look like they've got everything under control tend to be exactly the ones who've simply gotten very good at making sure nobody looks closely enough to find out otherwise. It's also worth talking about what Itachi's method teaches Sasuke, indirectly, because I think this is an underrated piece of the tragedy. Sasuke doesn't just inherit grief and rage from what happened. He inherits, in a much subtler way, his brother's exact template for how to handle unbearable pain. Alone, through overwhelming competence, without trusting anyone with the full truth of what you're carrying. Watch Sasuke's own arc after the revelation. He doesn't process his grief by opening up to Naruto, or to Sakura, or to anyone in his life who's trying to reach him. He isolates. He pursues an extreme unilateral solution to what he perceives as an unjust world, exactly the way his brother once did. He decides, alone, what needs to be done, and executes it without meaningfully consulting the people who love him. It's almost a direct echo, and I don't think that's accidental on the story's part, even if it's not stated outright. Sasuke didn't just lose his family to Itachi's plan. He absorbed Itachi's entire operating model for how a person handles catastrophic pain, and that model, replicated, nearly ends the world a second time. This is, I think, the clearest evidence that the pattern isn't actually a virtue, even inside the story's own. Trusted with the most sensitive, dangerous missions in his world precisely because he's so reliably excellent at everything he attempts. And there's a version of this trope that shows up constantly in fiction and in real life. The person who is so competent, so reliable, so good at handling difficult things alone, that everyone around them stops checking whether they actually need help. Competence, past a certain threshold, becomes a kind of camouflage. People assume that because you can handle something, you don't need support handling it, and the more capable you are, the less anyone thinks to ask how you're actually doing underneath the performance of handling it. Itachi is the most extreme possible version of this pattern. He's so capable that an entire secret organization trusts him with an impossibly dangerous double agent role for years. He's so capable that the current and former Hokage trust him with the most sensitive secret in the village's history. He's so capable that nobody, not his peers, not his superiors, not even his own little brother, ever stops to ask whether the boy who just murdered his entire family at 13 might need actual psychological support afterward, rather than just a mission assignment and a cover story. His competence becomes the very thing that guarantees his isolation, because nobody around him is equipped, or willing, to look past how well he's performing and ask what it's actually costing him to perform that well. This should sound familiar if you've ever been the reliable one in a family, a friend group, or a workplace. The person who never drops the ball gets handed more weight, not less, precisely because they've proven they can carry it. And the more weight they carry successfully, the harder it becomes for anyone to imagine they might be struggling, which means the support that less capable people get offered automatically, check-ins, patience, room to fall apart occasionally, quietly stops being offered to the logic. If Itachi's method of processing trauma, total self-reliance, total secrecy, total unilateral decision-making, were genuinely healthy, you wouldn't expect it to replicate itself into an even more destructive form in the next generation. But it does, almost exactly, because that's what unprocessed patterns tend to do. They don't stay contained to the person who developed them. They get modeled, absorbed, and repeated by the people closest to that person, usually without anyone consciously choosing to pass them on. Itachi never meant to teach Sasuke that isolation is strength, but it's the only lesson he ever actually demonstrated, consistently, across Sasuke's entire childhood and beyond, regardless of what his intentions were. So here's the actual unglamorous takeaway, stripped of the tragic score playing in the background. Being extraordinarily capable does not obligate you to carry everything alone, and loving someone does not give you the right to make their most important decisions for them without their knowledge. Itachi's story is beautiful specifically because it's fiction, because the narrative can guarantee that his gamble pays off, that Sasuke survives, that the forehead poke lands exactly the way it needs to land for maximum emotional impact. Real life doesn't offer that guarantee. Real secrecy, real unilateral sacrifice, real decisions made about someone else's life without their consent tend to produce exactly the kind of resentment, confusion, and delayed grief that Sasuke experiences, minus the narratively convenient ending where the truth comes out in time to matter, minus the guarantee that the person you were protecting will ever actually understand why you did what you did before it's too late to tell them yourself. If you take one thing from Itachi's story, let it be this. The people who love you would almost always rather be trusted with a hard truth than protected by a beautiful lie. Competence is not a substitute for connection, and carrying everything alone, no matter how gracefully you do it, is not the same thing as strength. It's just strength's most convincing disguise, right up until the moment it's too late to take the mask off in front of anyone who still had time left to know you. One last thing worth saying, because it's the part people usually skip on their way to the tears. Notice that the story only lets Itachi be fully understood after he's already dead. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just a plot mechanism for a dramatic reveal. It's the logical endpoint of a life built entirely around being misunderstood on purpose. If your love for someone can only be fully explained posthumously through someone else's testimony, after you're no longer around to answer questions or receive forgiveness in person, that's not the most beautiful possible outcome of devotion. That's the saddest one available. It just happens to make for extraordinary fiction, which is exactly why it's worth being careful about turning it into a template for how you love the people in your own very real, very unscripted life. And that's really the whole argument in miniature. Fiction can afford a plan this risky because fiction controls the outcome. It can guarantee that the lie gets corrected in time. that the brother survives long enough to hear the truth, that the tragedy resolves into something meaningful instead of just something wasted. Your life doesn't come with a writer making sure the reveal lands before it's too late. Which means the safest, kindest, most quietly courageous thing you can do for the people you love isn't a decade of noble secrecy. It's a hard conversation, had early, while there's still time left for both of you to actually live with the answer.